of Point Sur and requests that the department continue to engage with recreational stakeholders and tribes in Southern California regarding potential future action south of Point Sur as part of the California Halibut Management Review currently underway.
I will second that as well.
All right, so we've got a revised motion by Vice President Zavaleta and a second by Commissioner Sklar. Sherry, could you read the roll for us?
Vice President Zavaleta,
Aye.
Commissioner Sklar,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
President Murray.
Aye. So the motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Merritt. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christine, for your presentations. So that takes us to agenda item number 6, which is the recreational take of sea urchin, where we'll consider adopting proposed amendments to regulations for the recreational take of sea urchin to extend the bag limit exemption sunset date. And Melissa is going to give us some notes on public comment. And then after that, I'll hand it over to Susan.
Thank you, President Murray. Again, if you are making public comment or you're joining us here today in the room and you would like to speak to this agenda item, item number 6, recreational take of sea urchin, you should have submitted your card already. If you haven't, please do so now. Staff will call several speakers at a time. Please line up behind the podium when your name is called, and the order is not important. If you're participating via Zoom or phone, you'll have approximately 3 minutes to raise your hand at the beginning of the item, which is until 11:20. So if you would like to speak to item 6, recreational take of sea urchin, please raise your hand in Zoom or on the phone by 11:20. If you're on the phone, the raise your hand is press *9. Please press it only once. And for those of you who are raising your hands in Zoom, please leave them raised. Staff will lower them when they have gathered all of the names. Again, if you're on Zoom and want to provide comment on agenda item 6, recreational take of sea urchin, please raise your hand by 11:20.
All right, so this is the adoption hearing for recreational take of sea urchin. In October, the commission authorized a notice of intent to amend regulations to extend a sunset date for Casper Cove, as well as including an option to extend Tanker Reef's sunset date for a period of 5 years within a portion of the current removal area. And the current regulations that are in place will expire in April 2024 unless action is taken under this proposed action today. I want to call your attention to 2 comment letters in your meeting materials. One is a joint memo from the California Ocean Protection Council, the department, and Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, with comments and a recommendation concerning Tanker Reef regulations. The other is a comment from the primary organizer of the Tanker Reef project, who has been facilitating and organizing stakeholder or recreational diver participation. So for today's presentation, Brian Owens, who's Senior Environmental Scientist and Supervisor, is going to be giving the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, President Murray, fellow commissioners. Just want to welcome you aboard, Commissioner Anderson. Good to have you on board here. My name is Brian Owens. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the Northern Invertebrate Fisheries Project. Thank you for having me back. I'm sorry I can't be there in person to present the proposed minutes to Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations, Section 2906. To hopefully inform your decision today regarding recreational take of sea urchin harvest at Casper Cove and Tanker Reef. Next slide, please. So today I'll briefly bring you up to speed with some background material. We'll reiterate the proposed amendments for Casper Cove and Tanker Reef that Susan described, and then I'll explain the department's recommendation. Our recommendation does come with an alternative pathway for continuing engagement that I'll explain to you in just a minute. Next slide. So just as a reminder, there were severe ecological disruptions starting in 2014 that impacted kelp forest. Emergency action was taken to reduce urchins at Casper Cove and Tanker Reef, both of which were approved with the intent of testing whether sport divers could effectively be used to cull urchins and restore both bull kelp and giant kelp populations. Next slide. Since the adoption of the temporary regulations, I just want to emphasize that considerable work has been underway to advance kelp recovery in California. Several kelp research and restoration projects have been implemented across the state to test efficacy, context, and application of different kelp restoration tools. There's been $10 million has been made available to monitor, protect, and restore kelp forest ecosystems and enhance the resilience of coastal communities that they support. But also, the department did provide you all with a high-level overview of these efforts at the November MRC meeting, which was accompanied by a more detailed written report and a robust discussion with the MRC members and public commenters. The report also includes some brief sections on Casper Cove and Tinker Reef, including preliminary data of efforts to date. Additionally, since the implementation of these temporary regulations, the department, in partnership with Ocean Protection Council, or OPC, has initiated development of a kelp restoration and management plan, which will include a restoration toolkit. Next slide. So moving on to the proposed amendments, as we showed you at the notice hearing, here is a map of the current boundary in yellow with the modified boundary in red, which you'll see in option 2. I'll discuss that in a minute. You can also see the green restoration area, or cable grid as it's known by the dive community. And the purple to the right, the modified boundary, is where the coaling area does not occur, the control area. I do want to clarify that the department did work with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project to identify the preferred location of the proposed modified boundary. They came up with an area they considered that would work for them based on some guidelines we gave them to stay away from the cable grid and control areas, to not affect post-restoration monitoring. And we took those boundaries and we tweaked them just a bit to make them more feasibly enforceable. Next slide. Now that I've explained that little nuance, here are 2 options for your consideration today. Option 1 is to extend Casper Cove another 5 years to 2029 and allow existing provision to expire for Tinker Reef on April 1st, 2024, or this year, as defined in regulation. Option 2 is to extend Casper Cove another 5 years and extend Tinker Reef sunset date for a portion of the existing boundaries only for another 5 years until 2029. Next slide. So the department is recommending option 1 for the following reasons. The department supports a continuation at Casper Cove due to the work being delayed by COVID-19 and the work is considered incomplete. Casper Cove is a bull kelp dominated kelp forest, so better understanding of urchin suppression techniques in the North Coast will be important to the development of the kelp restoration and management plan. For Tinker Reef, the department has met with its agency partners, particularly the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and the Ocean Protection Council, who have been supporting this work over the last several years. And we all agreed to allow the regulation to sunset and to begin post-restoration monitoring. As a reminder, a sunset date for Tinker Reef provided 3 years for recreational dive communities in Monterey County to self-organize, execute culling efforts, and conduct monitoring to assess the efficacy of removal efforts, both in terms of social and ecological outcomes. I do want to reiterate again that the original intent of the temporary amendment was to explore the feasibility of kelp restoration via urchin culling by sport divers, and to investigate any potential environmental impacts from culling activities. Finally, independent monitoring by agency staff is ongoing and will continue through 2024 to evaluate the efficacy of urchin culling efforts and determine the persistence of kelp. If kelp persists at Tinker Reef through 2024, longer-term monitoring may be required to determine the duration of the persistence and the efficacy of these efforts. Next slide. So having said that, we do sincerely appreciate all the time, effort, and passion that has been put towards Tinker Reef. Given interest expressed by the dive community, as well as the desire from some commissioners to provide a pathway for continued engagement, the department has identified a potential alternative pathway for some continued work at the site that also ensures essential data collection can occur, such as the post-restoration monitoring. We've identified the scientific collecting permit, which would be a valuable mechanism to keep the public actively engaged with kelp restoration activities. For instance, this permit would enable continued experimentation, enable participation of volunteer divers, prioritize post-restoration monitoring, and support sustainable engagement with the department and project partners. Finally, the department is committed to working with the petitioner, Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and project partners to ensure post-restoration monitoring at Tinker Reef is completed prior to any permitting to return to the restoration grid and control areas via scientific collecting permit. Next slide. And with that, Thank you. I've also asked Dr. Kristen Elsmore just to stand by to help me answer any questions you have, and we're here for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
You got it.
Commissioners, any questions before we go to Keith Rootsart's presentation? All right, seeing none, I'll invite Keith Rootsart to come up. And Keith has been approved for 3 minutes for his presentation.
Thank you, President Murray. My name is Keith Rootsart. I'm with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project, and I have a slide presentation today, if we could bring that up. Very good. Can I go to the next slide, please? There it is. So this is a little update on the data that I presented at the last meeting. So this is additional data from Reef Check. That's the only data that shared with us. And the urchins went down on the project after we had been doing some culling, and unfortunately they also went down on the control. So I don't know what any of this means anymore. Next slide, please. So if we sunset, well, I'm being honest, right? So if this is sunsetted, the urchins will eat everything. This is, you just look around Monterey Bay and you can see that. I mean, have you seen the teeth on these things? They just eat everything. The next slide, please. So if the option 2 were to be continued, it would just fail. What we found is that we tried to go 100 meters to the west with a lot of effort, but the regulars don't want to come out anymore to this place. I don't want to go out there. And the only kelp we saw that moved towards that way was just a little bit along the edge. And so if we go out there, it will fail. So we're really not willing to do that. We're not here to fail. We're here to succeed at this. And we have success, so we want to build on that and go to more areas. Next slide, please. So we propose another option, which is to just exclude the grid. I mean, the enforcement in this area is kind of meaningless. There's no enforcement per se. And we work on a one-on-one basis with the department. And so it's really easy for us to just turn off the grid assignments and just call around it. And that would be more consistent with what's gone on this whole time, because we've been calling, most of our effort is around the grid and not on the grid. And the kelp forest would recede to as you see it there in that slide. Next slide, please. This is another option, is just exclude it for a year, just start us late, after the post-restoration monitoring is complete. And then we can begin again when we have time. Our desire is to go to better places by scientific collecting permit onto granite substrates. And so by, there's the offer now to go and do it here, but I don't have a scientific collecting permit. I've been trying to get one since Dr. Schumann mentioned it in April of 2022, and I haven't been able to get one. And the 3 that I've had previously all failed. So I'm really kind of discouraged by that. But later on today, we're asking for a large petition to go back and do these areas. So even if you sunset it, we're just going to ask for it again. I'm not going away. I'm here all the time. You'll learn that from me. And I wanted to also bring up, there's an incident about what is the damage that the divers cause to the reef by their hammers. It was brought up by Dr. Lonard at the last meeting. And so I brought the hammers here that he did in his study, and I want to staff and the public can come and take a look at it and see how you would call urchins on the site. And there's some little hearts for people to put in a cup and take to your station. So happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks, Keith. All right, so seeing no questions or comments or discussion, let's go to public comment. Sherry, how many speakers do we have?
We have 7 more speakers.
7 more speakers. Yeah, I think for this, I do want to say we have discussed this topic at length over many meetings. So most excited to hear things we haven't heard before. And let's give Sherry's speakers 2 minutes for this agenda item. Thanks.
Okay, our next speaker will be Barbara Davis, followed by Grant Downey and Tristan McHugh. Barbara Davis, go ahead, please.
Yeah, my name's Barbara Davis. I'm a longtime Monterey diver and a kelp restoration diver volunteer with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. I'm not aware of the details of this new scientific collecting permit, what might be allowed by that, but I do want to reiterate and support what Keith has said, and that, we've had the trained divers working out there. We are making a difference. We would like to continue to do that. Stopping and doing nothing, I can understand the need for monitoring and evaluation, but to not allow our efforts to continue doesn't make any sense to me. We are, sorry, I was looking for my comments here. We're increasing the biodiversity that's out there. And, we can show that if the urchins are culled, that the kelp does come back. And it would just be very disheartening to not have that continue. I mentioned this, I think, in a previous call too, but the 6 goals of the MPAs that were stated, our work does support that. We're protecting the natural diversity and abundance of marine life. We're rebuilding depleted populations. We're protecting our unique marine heritage, and just stopping this effort to me just does not make sense in supporting these activities and supporting what we're trying to do and supporting the results that we have shown. So that's, yeah, I have to say I do support either extending it, or as Keith suggested, perhaps don't cull on the grid, but continue culling around it, because that way we can protect what we have, what we've been able to create. So thank you very much for that, for your consideration.
Our next speaker is Grant Downey. Go ahead, please.
Hello, President Murray, and congratulations. And hello, commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Grant Downey. I'm a California sea urchin diver located up here in Fort Bragg, California on the North Coast. I support option 1 for extending the Casper sunset date. The initial kickoff was highly delayed because of COVID, and we really need to allow these recreational divers to show that the effort they can put in up here on the North Coast. I also would suggest that the commission adopt future petitions put in for opening the South Casper area for commercial take as well, so that as a organization, commercial divers can work right alongside the recreational divers to put a full force at bringing back the kelp. The underwater ecosystem up here on the North Coast is devastating. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Our next speaker will be Tristan McHugh, who will be followed by Robert Halem and Nancy Caruso. Tristan McHugh, go ahead, please.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Tristan McHugh, and I'm the Kelp Project Director with the Nature Conservancy. I live up in Fort Bragg, and I'm part of this collective of folks working at Casper Cove, and I've been part of this broader effort to understand public participation in kelp recovery efforts since 2018. The Nature Conservancy is supportive of extending the temporary extension for culling urchin at Casper Cove beyond the original sunset date of April 1st, 2024. Grant Downey mentioned all of the challenges. I would also like to highlight, we have seen not much natural recovery in the North Coast, and the life history characteristics of bull kelp are specifically challenging to study and understand. And so we agree that this extension would allow more time to see this program through, involve the public, and continue learning about their potential participation in recovery. So thank you all for your leadership in this conversation over the past couple of years, and we look forward to continuing to learn about the impacts of this work. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robert Halem, who will be followed by Nancy Caruso. Robert Halem, go ahead, please. You need to unmute yourself.
I thought I had. Hello, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, this is Robert Halem, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Keith and Barbara both mentioned that for the Tankers Reef project, one of the requirements was that it's not just anyone to show up, but rather the divers need to be specially trained and certified for the specific tasks that we're doing there. I am one of the instructors, a very limited number, who do that certification. I've personally certified probably more than 75 divers over the last 2 years. As I keep going down there with my students and my divers, I have been able to visualize and see the incredible difference that it makes. Places that we have not been in the area, a diver can literally in a 40-minute dive find close to 1,000 urchins to be culled. If you go back to an area where the divers have been, it's hard to find 5 or 6. Where we have culled, the kelp is growing. Where the masses of urchins are, places are barren. It is a project that is working. I don't see any reason to stop it. If the goal is to see if the kelp will come back without diver involvement, then say leave the grid alone. I mean, that's a full hectare. It's 100 meters square. That's 2.5 acres of sea bottom that, you know, we can leave alone, not touch. But the rest of Monterey Bay is totally almost devoid of kelp, and the divers can make a major difference in bringing it back. Thank you very much, and I hope that we can extend the diver area where we can cull urchins. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Nancy Caruso, followed by Scott Parsons and Brian Taniguchi. Nancy Caruso, go ahead, please.
Hello, Commissioners. This is Nancy Caruso. Are you able to hear me?
Yes,
go
we
ahead.
can hear you.
Thank you. I'm the Executive Director of Get Inspired and managed a 10-year community-based giant kelp restoration project in Orange County, which was successful at restoring our giant kelp forests, which were gone for 25 years. And it was an effective urchin barren for all of that time. I also procured the original funds for the urchin removal projects to start at Casper Cove. Now, and I removed over 1 million sea urchins from our Orange County reefs and planted juvenile kelp on our 42 miles of coast from 2002 to 2012. And I witnessed the results firsthand. The work that's being done in Monterey and the North Coast and Casper is imperative to the recovery of the kelp forests. I saw what happens when urchin removal is stalled or stopped when I was doing this project for 10 years, and the urchins eat the adjacent kelp. This is common sense to any diver. So I'm in favor of supporting both of these projects. So please support the continuation of these citizen science projects in both locations. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Scott Parsons. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Commissioners. This is Scott Parsons. I'm a certified kelp restoration specialist. I've culled around 12,000 urchins myself, and working with Robert and Barbara, who spoke really well just before me. I just want to concur with them. And I'm just here to support the project and let you know my support. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Brian Taniguchi. Go ahead, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Brian Taniguchi. I'm also one of the divers supporting the Tankers Reef effort. I read the documents associated with the Commission's decision-making, and I'm disappointed by the direction that the Commission plans to take, if I read the documents correctly, which is option 1 only. And so I'm wondering what's the next action that can be taken in the Monterey Bay area to help restore the kelp in that area? Is it just to watch what's happening and not take further action? I'm hoping that the comments about enabling continued experimentation will allow us to perhaps extend the effort, the culling effort, in other parts of Monterey Bay. And I encourage you, if that is the direction you're going to take, to do that quickly so that we don't lose momentum of the diving community that has worked so hard to help enable the kelp restoration in the Tankers Reef area. And I also have a question about the Casper Cove experimentation, whether the intent there will be to sunset at the end of that as well. And then that calls into question all the effort that the divers are putting in up north. Is that going to go for naught if they're also going to just get sunset at the end? Thank you very much.
That concludes the
so much.
public speakers.
Thanks, Sherry, and thank you to our speakers. Commissioners, we have a action that we're considering before us. We have 2 options. I have some thoughts. I'm happy to get started unless anyone else would like to. Yeah. So for me, it was really helpful to go back and see the 2020 memo again, which really did specify that the urchin culling effort at Tankers Reef must inform future management and ask the petitioner to evaluate the efficacy of community-led in-water urchin culling activities and then report back findings at the end of 3 years, and to evaluate the potential ecological impacts from in-water urchin culling methods. So this original intent of the original petition and this original memo from the state is relevant to the decision we're making today. And consistent with this original intent, we now have a memo from the Ocean Protection Council, the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and all three support the exemption at Tanker Reef sunsetting on April of this year, 2024. Now, you know, it's not about this is what the agencies want, and so that means we have to rubber stamp it and we have to do what they're asking for. But it is about, you know, this original intent of this original experiment. By sunsetting this year, this spring, we can allow partners to track kelp and urchin changes within the treatment grid, including whether any positive effects persist, right? That really is an important part of this experiment. And that can inform the evaluation of culling as a restoration tool in other places. There is a path forward, as we heard in the department presentation from Brian, for engaging local communities to tend local kelp forests, to harness all this important and wonderful and valuable community energy, and even to maybe do so in an area, in a granite area that might be a better fit for the goals of Keith and the giant kelp community. But for me, there really does need to be a fresh start on a new urchin culling project in Monterey that better aligns with the current goals that I hear from the giant kelp community and from Keith Rutzart versus what was in and what we approved in the 2020 petition, which was an experiment. So that's sort of my current thinking on this issue, but I'd love to hear from other commissioners as well.
Yeah, thank you, President Murray. I think that was a really nice articulation of the shift that I've been hearing in the reasons underlying, you know, all of this passion to do this work. Like, I think it's really heartening to hear that there is so much desire to keep doing this work indefinitely, and that is different from an experiment having to do with whether culling for a period has more sustained effects. So we want to do that learning, and we want to create opportunities for the folks who are passionate about this work to keep doing it. I hear this nexus around the scientific collection permit pathway, partly because the department is articulating support for considering that pathway. Again, I also appreciate that the Kelp Restoration and Management Plan, the CRAMP, awesome acronym, is now in development, because that's, you know, that's another opportunity to sort of think big about how we're going to restore kelp. I think there's nobody's going to disagree with the dire need to address what's been happening with kelp forests in the state. So, and then I think extending the opportunity at Casper Cove offers some bridge. There's a place that the work can continue to occur while sort of next phase gets worked out. So I support that.
Thanks for that, Vice President Zavaleta. Commissioner Sklar? Okay, hearing agreement. And Commissioner Anderson, I know you're still getting up to speed on these issues, but just absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, with that, would anyone like to make a motion?
I can make a motion that the commission adopt option 1 of the proposed changes to section 29.06 related to the recreational take of sea urchin.
I'll second that.
All right, so we have a motion by Vice President Zavaleta, a second by Commissioner Sklar. Sherry, could we get a roll call?
Vice President Zavaleta,
Aye.
Commissioner Sklar,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
President Murray.
Aye. So the motion passes unanimously. And that brings us to agenda item number 7, which is recreational fishing regulations for federal groundfish. Melissa is going to give us some notes on public comment, and then Susan will lead us through this agenda item.
Thank you, President Murray. So this is the call for public comment on agenda item 7, recreational fishing regulations for federal groundfish. If you would like to provide public comment on this item, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. The queue will be open for 3 minutes. So please raise your hand no later than 12:48 a.m. to comment on agenda item 7, recreational fishing regulations for federal groundfish. And if you're in the room with us here today and you want to speak to this item, you should have turned in your speaker card already. Thank you.
Great. This is the